Okay, I think we're on. So this is Pastor Jim Miller of Real Life Church, and I'm here with Dr. Rhona Harrison, who's staff counselor at Cal Poly Pomona, and is staff in, what's the title? Is staff in the?
Staff psychologist in the counseling center.
In the counseling center, that was the right word, yeah. And Dr. Harrison has a unique lens on what's going on in our world because she is versed in the world of psychology, and our entire world is going through psychological challenges like we've never experienced before. Because even though the world has been through plagues and diseases, we've never had the age of the internet on top of that. We share everything right now. Am I right?
That's right. That's right.
So, Dr. Harrison, Rhona, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And I just thought today we'd spend a little time talking about the stages that we go through when we grieve, and what we should expect, and what it's going to feel like.
Sure. So I do think that a lot of people may be going through the grief stages right now, maybe without realizing it. And as we know, grief is a response to any loss that is experienced. So this could be grieving the loss of our lives before the coronavirus.
Right. Loss of normal.
The loss of normal, that's right. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about what the stages of grief are. So it's important to note that grief is a very personal process for people that has no specified timeline. There's also no right or wrong way to grieve. So certain things like cultural factors and life experiences, these really shape the way that we mourn loss. And again, loss can be any loss of a relationship, loss of a family member, loss of the norm. You know, there are many different things that we can grieve.
Loss of a job.
Loss of a job, that's right. And grief is really necessary for healing. A lot of the clients that I see, so I work in a college counseling center, so mainly young adults, but I have worked with also non-traditional students who are, older than the 18 to 22-year-olds. So what I see sometimes is that they want to skip the grieving process, and they want to be over the loss already. Okay. And often I'll say, a lot of the young adults I see come in grieving the loss of a relationship, or in other words, a breakup. Right. And a lot of times I say, unfortunately, there is no pain-free breakup. And in order to get over it, you must go through it. And
in order to get over it, you have to go through it. That makes sense.
And that's where counseling can be really helpful in feeling less alone as they go through that process. But oftentimes I'll hear, well, can I just get from point A to point C? Like, I don't want to feel the pain of, grieving.
Sure.
So it really is a necessary experience in order to be able to move forward.
Okay, that makes sense. So given that we have to go through it, what kind of stages of grief? Some people have heard of this before, and for some people this is totally new information. There have been identified stages that we go through with grief. And I know from my own experience, it's helpful to have some vocabulary to define what I'm going through so it feels less nebulous.
Absolutely. And so Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Before I start, it's important to note that these stages are non-linear, and individuals may enter each stage at any point in time. Okay. They may go back and forth. But when the research was done, these stages were what they found to be the most, prevalent. So not in any particular order, but it can be. So the first stage is the denial. They call it the denial stage. So this is when people may feel that initial shock or disbelief, or maybe feeling numb. If it's okay, I'll give some personal examples.
Yeah, sure.
illustrate. So I remember when my dog died, so the dog that I had for 13 years or so, I was at the mall and my brother called me and said, hey, you know, our dog's gone. So I remember in that moment, like feeling like, no, it's not true. It's not true. Because I had to get home from the mall to my house. I had to drive, you know, and be able to get home safely.
Mm.
So I think in that stage, the numbness helped me function temporarily.
Okay. Okay.
So it is somewhat of a coping mechanism, the
Okay.
denial.
We,
Go ahead.
would you say in our present situation, we're past that? We're past denial?
I think so. I think so. We may have been in denial maybe at the beginning of the year when we were hearing about it.
Right, right.
You know, and again, that's a normal reaction. It helps us to carry on and live life and to be able to function. It also prevents being flooded by unpleasant emotions.
Yeah.
But avoiding the reality altogether is unhealthy. So temporarily it helps us function, but to avoid it altogether, to deny that there was a loss, it's not healthy either. And you know, go more into that. So denial is the first stage, and it's, you know, associated with shock or disbelief or numbness. When Kobe Bryant's death, when I first heard that, I was also in shock and disbelief for a long time. So that's, again, kind of like a coping mechanism that we all go through.
Right.
So, and then the next stage, again, in no particular order, is anger. So when that denial fades, we find that the pain arises, and so does the anger.
Okay.
The anger can be directed at the person who left or person who's gone. Sometimes it's directed at God, you know, like, why did God let this happen?
Yeah, I hear people say that, yeah.
Or maybe at the doctors who we think, oh, they didn't save my loved one.
Right.
So it's important to note that anger is a normal human emotion, and it actually reconnects us back to that reality. So where, you know, in the denial stage, we may be removed from it to help us function. The anger kind of just sucks you back to reality.
Yeah, yeah. So anger is normal, and blame is a common manifestation of anger.
Absolutely.
And if you watch the news right now, everybody's looking for someone to blame, none of which will actually fix it.
Yes, and it's dangerous when you blame, you know, maybe a certain group of people who, you know, are associated with where the virus started.
Right.
So it's very dangerous to blame. But again, the anger is normal, and it's we all deal with anger differently. So the emotion is normal, but how we deal with it can make a difference.
Okay.
You know, unfortunately, we live in a society where sometimes, you know, we're told, don't show your anger, don't show your emotions. And really, it's okay to express these emotions, because they are normal human emotions. So again, anger is, I suppose, necessary for healing as well, and it reconnects us to that reality of the loss. And if we don't express our anger in a healthy manner, then that's when, you know, that term, you know, bottled up comes from, and it may come out in different ways.
So it's healthy to express anger. We should express it, but there are healthy and unhealthy ways to do that.
Yes. So of course, you know, being physically violent is an unhealthy way. Talking about it in a safe setting or with somebody that we trust. Some people like to physically let out their anger in terms of exercising, running.
What about venting on Facebook? What do you think of that?
You know,
scale of 1 to 10, how good an idea is that?
Again, it's tricky because it may feel cathartic for the person that's venting, but I don't know how helpful that is for, you know, your social relationship.
Right.
So maybe a little bit of healthy venting, but just I think as long as it's done in an assertive manner that respects other people.
Right.
Okay. So definitely there are definitely different ways to express anger and to vent.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
And then the third stage is called bargaining. So this
Mm.
is characterized by if onlys and what ifs.
Okay.
Gosh, if only I had called that person, before they died, or if only I, did this, or if only I
Yeah.
took them to this hospital, or if only I had, I don't know, washed my hands more or
Right.
something, then maybe I wouldn't have caught, you know. So this can lead to guilt,
Mm.
unfortunately. And then I personally experienced a loss of a friend who died by suicide. And,
Mm.
if I allow myself to sit with, gosh, I should have just tried to get together with her more before, there was no way that I would have known that that was going to happen.
Right.
So if we allow ourselves to go down those, with those thoughts, again, we could sit feeling very guilty.
Yeah. And
And
I see
bargaining,
that. I see that a lot on the theological front. I mean, that is one of the major issues is that after people grieve, they feel like if I had done something differently, God wouldn't have let this happen.
that's right.
And I assure them there's not a cause and effect relationship between, you do something bad and the world falls apart. We don't have a vindictive God who's
Exactly.
waiting to zap people with lightning bolts. That was Zeus, not Jesus. So
That's
we
right.
see that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And in this stage, people may do things to not feel the pain.
Hmm.
So, in other words, I'll do anything to not feel this way. And so sometimes, I've seen in some of my clients, they might use substances to feel
Hmm.
numb
Hmm.
or to engage in other ways to make them feel physical pain. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
uh, people who cut, that's very real. That's a very real thing. And in order to not feel the emotional pain,
Hmm.
this is where they begin to bargain. So this is the
Okay.
bargaining stage.
That's
Yep.
interesting. I'd never identified that as part of a bargaining stage, but it
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, I'll do
The
anything
trade-off.
to
Yeah.
not feel this pain. Yeah. And then the next stage is depression.
Mm-hmm.
So this type of depression is not the same as a major depressive disorder,
Okay.
but rather this type of depression is an appropriate response to a significant loss.
Hmm.
So um, psychiatrists and psychologists, we use what's called the DSM-5, which helps us to make diagnoses and treat our clients and patients. They're actually two different things. So there's uncomplicated bereavement and there's major depressive disorders. So the depression that results from a loss, um, it's actually an appropriate response. And so on our end, we want to be careful not to diagnose people
Hmm.
and, perhaps be quick to refer them to a psychiatrist for medication when the grieving is a normal response,
Right. Right.
right? So we don't want to, I guess, put a cap on something that's an appropriate response.
You don't want to sedate that.
Right,
Hmm.
exactly. So in this stage, the individual may feel the immense sadness, hopelessness. They may withdraw from people. Their sleep and appetite, may be disturbed. And in some cases, there are suicidal thoughts. So we really want to monitor those. And
Yeah.
again, for some individuals, maybe it's a belief that, well, if I go, then I can be with my loved one, right? And so
Hmm.
we really want to understand where those thoughts, if they are there, of wanting to not exist, where are they coming from, what's driving them? And again, it may be related to wanting to reunite with the loved one.
And there's no, or maybe there is. Is there or is there not any kind of set timeline on how long like a period of depression will last?
So you mean related to the loss?
Yeah, in terms of grieving.
In terms of grieving, so I mean, formally they say, I believe 6 months is
Hmm.
the timeline. But again, we want to be very careful putting any kind of timeline on grief because there is no timeline and no right or wrong way to grieve.
Right. Right.
So when I see clients, sometimes the loss happened maybe 2 years before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but they're just starting to notice the impact that it's having on
Okay.
them now. So I want to take that into consideration as well. So kind of like whenever the um, grief actually started, maybe they were in the denial stage for a long time in order to be able to do their schoolwork and
Uh-huh.
you know
Uh-huh.
take care of their
Ah, okay.
right. And so when they start to notice it's impacting their functioning, sometimes that's when they seek help. And then, so kind of like taking that into consideration as well. So maybe it's a delayed, kind of like a delayed reaction. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
So they
Mhm.
postponed it. So the whole process takes longer because they've waited to launch it.
Right, exactly, exactly. So, so it's really important to look at the person as a whole.
Okay.
Like if there are other symptoms that they are experiencing, you know, we have to look at it. Okay, is this bereavement? Is this depression? And you know, how do we want? What's the best way to treat this? So,
Okay.
yeah. And then the final stage is called acceptance. Now, this doesn't mean that we are okay with the loved ones being gone.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that, you know, we're now happy that they're gone. Not at all. But rather, it's an acceptance of the reality that the loved one is physically gone, that they're no longer there.
Mm.
This also helps us to move forward. And in this stage, the individual may find that it's become easier to talk about the loss. They may find that their uh, symptoms or depression has kind of like subsided, right? Like maybe they're starting to feel a little bit more hopeful,
Sure.
accepting that the loss has happened. And again, so the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. They're non-linear, and people can go back in and out of the stages.
Mm.
So even if it's been years, you know, it's okay if you still feel angry, you know, as a response to missing that loved one.
Hmm.
Those are the 5
That
stages.
is helpful. That is so helpful. That and I learned something. I've heard those before, and that I had still learned some things by hearing you walk through them again.
Mhm.
So it's good for us to be cognizant of the fact that right now our entire world is going through that process at all different stages. Probably none of us is at acceptance yet because we're not at the end, right? We're
Right.
not at the resolution. But
That's
we're
right.
all. We shouldn't be surprised when people are angry. We shouldn't be surprised when people are depressed.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
any last thoughts on how best we care for ourselves or one another as we go through this process?
Yeah, I think just treating each other with compassion and just putting ourselves in each other's shoes. You know, a lot of parents right now are home and having to teach their kids
Right.
probably for the first time, you know, and kind of like homeschooling. And so I think just being really gracious to each other during this time. And again, the anger is normal, but blaming people is not really healthy and not helpful. So we want to always remember to treat each other kindly
Yeah.
and, um, you know, also setting boundaries for ourselves as well, as far as how much work can we realistically do, you know, while we're at home caring for other family members as well. So
Right. So a lot of grace. We need a lot
a
of
lot
grace
of
in this
grace,
season. Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Well, Dr. Harrison, thank you so much. I appreciate you walking us through those. Those are going to be helpful tools for us to hold on to. We're all going to go through this together,
Sure.
and hopefully with a little more understanding now.
Yes. Oh, and one last thing, if I can add,
Yes.
I
Yes.
think seeking support is an important thing. Nobody is going through this alone. So even if that means reaching out to people, and you know, I know that we can't. Or we really shouldn't physically connect with each other, but just reaching out if you need to talk to somebody.
A few phone calls. Yeah.
Yeah, social support is a healthy way of coping. So use those resources, use the people around you that want to be there right now.
Good. Good work. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Okay.